the summer of 1985, I went to France to lose my virginity. Now, don't get me wrong. This wasn't akin to some Vegas trip. I had a willing partner on the other side of the Atlantic, my long-time, long-distance girlfriend, Kathleen. We'd known each other for 4 years, and since this is an early, late 20th century tale, had managed to stay connected without the wonders of email, Skype, or even cheap phone service. During those 4 years, we'd rarely seen each other, but had been steady pen pals, exchanging weekly handwritten letters. We never promised each other that we would not date other people. I had girlfriends and she boyfriends. We also had never explicitly stated that we were saving ourselves for each other, but in my mind it was implied. So it was to no little consternation that I received a letter in late 1984 confessing that Kathleen was no longer a virgin. I was crushed. Though I had spent much of my first semester with Jane, a pleasant girl with a single room in a dorm adjacent to mine, I could not bring myself to pull the revenge sex trigger. Jane really liked me, and well, I thought she was pleasant. I ended that relationship before Christmas break. 6 months later, the wound was close to healed, and after 2 months of working as a car washer and gopher in my uncle's Nissan dealership, I had money in my pocket and a ticket to see Kathleen and her family in August. The road to France from upstate New York went through JFK. A day before my flight, I found myself in Grand Central Station, waiting for my friend Lauren. Lauren and I had met that spring in freshman seminar. I introduced her to raucous Cornell hockey games, and she brought me to poetry readings in the lounge of her artsy dorm. She was brilliant and beautiful, an exotic blend of Chinese, Jamaican, and Jewish. She enjoyed my company, to be sure, but also the company of her longtime boyfriend, whose room was 2 floors above hers. We wandered the city for hours, finally making our way to my stepsister's apartment in Queens. My stepsister and her husband worked the graveyard shift, so Lauren and I found ourselves alone on a steamy New York City night. I watched her at the window, gazing at the skyline, wearing only a long t-shirt. The sweating silence was broken when she told me that she was newly single. A night of rapture followed. I finally fell asleep, my head filled with visions of a month together in the city. The plane ticket in my bag seemed irrelevant. Not true. No rapture. She was single that night, but I was not to find that out for several months. And so after a hot, but entirely chaste night, we awoke to my departure day. My flight was in the evening, so again we had time in the city. Today, however, we had a purpose. She had been told that Times Square was the place to buy convincing fake IDs. We found a place with a great product. The ID looked perfect. But then it got laminated. It cost me my last $5 cash. At least I had a subway token for the ride to JFK. We sheepishly said goodbye, and I hopped on a train. As I rode the subway, my mind swimming between Lauren and Kathleen, I noticed that the route to JFK involved a transfer and an additional fare for which I had no money, save some useless francs and a wad of traveler's checks. Remember those, anybody? I panicked. I was screwed. France was over. But maybe it wasn't too late to find Lauren. I'd only gone a few stops. I jumped out at the next stop and sprinted up the stairs, my travel bag in tow. Well, it wasn't too late to stop at a convenience store and break a $50 traveler's check for a pack of gum. I clutched the $49.25 of change and returned to the subway. Many, many hours later, I arrived at Kathleen's family home on the French Riviera. I was excited to see her, but also exhausted, so for the first day I didn't notice. But by the second day, it was apparent. Everyone, her parents, grandparents, younger brother, and older cousin Elik, was happy to see me. Everyone except Kathleen. She wasn't cruel, but just distant, and certainly not affectionate. I was completely taken aback. I'd come all this way for this? Leaving aside the not insignificant challenge of finding private time away from her mother's watchful eye, my loss of virginity now seemed to be less and less of a sure thing. So depressed, and in a place where I did not even need my glorious fake ID, I did what anyone in my situation would do. I drank. Elik took me to the local cafes and bars, where I discovered that the libation of choice was Recar, a disgusting, milky, black, licorice-tasting drink I hated. I drank it readily. On one of our early outings, we met up with some friends of his. Philippe was mid-30s and burly with a substantial beard. He chain-smoked and talked about his motorcycle. Véronique looked to be late 20s, slender, with that French woman's sexiness I was just beginning to appreciate. The talk was tense, even through the Recar-induced haze. Philippe abruptly left, and I heard Véronique mutter, "Good riddance." While she went to the bathroom, Eric explained that they were a long-time couple who had just recently split after his umpteenth infidelity. Several drinks later, Eric had disappeared, and I felt a hand on my leg. It was amazing. A real woman, a French woman at that, older, was coming on to me. I wasted no time. I threw down some francs on the table and led her out the door. We were quickly at her place, and 12 hours later, I'd gone from novice to well-experienced novice. It was incredible, a fantasy. But this fantasy didn't come true. Her hand never touched my leg. And only weeks later did Elique tell me that she was into me, wondering why I didn't pursue it. As the first week of the trip came to a close and Kathleen still hadn't come around, my drinking turned to driving. The family had an old car which no one else would drive. The car was a 1972 Simca. Actually, the two-door performance version. The car ran well. Its only quirk was that the brakes were not always reliable. At times, the pedal would go straight to the floor. The necessary fix was rapid downshifting, combined with simultaneous brake pumping and some choice words. Arrête, espèce de con! Stop, you son of a bitch! I loved driving the back roads and always volunteered for errands. One day, off for bread, I was a short distance from the house when the brakes failed. This was unfortunate timing, as they lived on a small road containing a few one-lane curves. Etiquette dictated that the second driver approaching the curve pause for the first driver to come through. I was the second driver and shortly found myself half off the road with one wheel in the ditch. Rather than stopping to help, the other car, neighbors as it turned out, spun through, leaving me dusty and irate. Cursing them, I lifted the right front end of the car out of the ditch by myself. But no buts, all true. I did it by myself, I swear. Later, incensed and depressed, I came to a road leading to a particularly beautiful cliff. Recalling my freshman physics, I imagined the car's trajectory, a perfect arc into the Mediterranean. I got back in the car, put it in reverse, then forward gear, began to gain speed. Okay, it's pretty obvious that didn't happen. Driving back to the house, I had a moment of clarity. Depression, drinking and driving and drinking, had to go. I'd come to be with Kathleen, and if I were to stay there, I had to make her want to be with me as well. Call it corny, but when I got back, it seemed as if she had the same epiphany. I can't say that our remaining time together was complete bliss, but we did have lots of fun. Some of it even in private. Leaving her 3 weeks later, I knew that our parting was quite possibly to be a final one.
Francois Bereaud.